I'd like to remind everyone about our meeting format. Tonight's Planning Commission meeting is being held in person and online. Commissioners, Planning Department staff, and members of the public are attending in the Wheat Ridge City Hall and also by way of Zoom. Members of the public who are not present and wish to make comments may participate virtually by joining through Zoom either on a device or by calling in. A Zoom meeting link and dial-in information can be found on wheatridgespeaks.org. In addition to being online via Zoom, we are also broadcasting this meeting on Channel 8 and wheatridgespeaks.org. When it is time for public comment, and there are a couple of public comment sessions tonight, those who wish to comment on our Zoom connection use the raise your hand button. If you're dialing in, press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute your phone. If you plan to speak online tonight, please keep background noise to a minimum. If you do not plan to speak, we recommend you simply view the meeting live by watching on Channel 8 or on wheatridgespeaks.org. We appreciate your participation. We hope to create a friendly and respectful atmosphere for public dialogue. I would now like to call the meeting to order. May I please get a roll call of the members?
Jonathan Shelkey. Here. Christine Disney.
Here.
Daniel Gravy.
Here.
Patrick Quinn.
Here.
Will Kearns.
Here.
Michael Moore.
Here.
Sierra Quiones.
Here.
And Krista Hollab is absent tonight.
The next order on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join me in the pledge. The next item is approving the order of tonight's agenda. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda will stand as published. Next, we'll vote to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? All right. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second?
Second.
Commissioners, please vote.
Motion approved 7-0.
We will now open the general interest public forum. This is the time for any persons to speak on any subject not appearing on the agenda. If you plan to speak on an item that is on the agenda, please wait until we get to those items. Those who wish to comment on Zoom, raise your hand. All speakers are asked to limit their comments to 3 minutes. Speakers may not donate their time. Is there anyone signed up to speak?
There's no one online.
Is there anyone on Zoom? No. All right. Okay, we have no public comment, so we'll move on now to the public hearing. We have 2 items on our agenda tonight. If you choose to testify, you are agreeing that the testimony that you will give is honest as you know it. Excuse me here, we have an extra page. Before we begin, I would like to welcome any members of the public that might be in the audience. There's nobody in chambers tonight. It is important that any comments be made in a dignified and civil manner. We hope to create a friendly and respectful atmosphere. We start all public hearings with a presentation from staff, and for some cases, with a presentation from the applicant. We have no applicants tonight, so that will not happen. Commissioner Carnes will now open the hearing for case number ZOA-2405. Would you please read the overview of that?
Sure, Madam Chair. Let's see.
An ordinance amending chapters 11 and 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws regarding requirements for short-term rentals and making conforming amendments therewith.
Thank you. May we please have a staff report?
You may. Good evening, Commission. I'm Scott Cutler, Senior Planner in the Community Development Department. I would like to talk quickly about this code amendment because a lot of the amendment actually is not within our purview. So this ordinance amending the short-term rental regulations amends both chapters 11, which is the administrative services portion of the city, and chapter 26, which is zoning. So tonight we'll be focusing specifically on the requirements to zoning. Planning Commission is the first step in the process for these types of code amendments that will ultimately go to City Council for final approval. And Planning Commission will vote and give a recommendation on the portions related to chapter 26. So with that, I'll get into what this ordinance is. City Council enacted legislation concerning licensing and enforcement of short-term rentals in February of 2021. The short-term rentals are for stays less than 30 days. And that licensing is actually going pretty well, according to the Finance Division. Since that time, staff has worked to implement the legislation. We've licensed short-term rentals. They've collected the applicable lodgers tax and have enforced the codified regulations. In February of 2024, one of our city councilors, Scott Ohm, raised a concern regarding exemption of townhomes in the mixed-use neighborhood zone districts from the whole home licensing cap. Now, for those that don't know what the licensing cap is, 2% of all short-term rental licenses are limited to 2% of all of the residences within each council district. And right now, 3 of the 4 districts are at that cap, but unintentionally, as part of the legislation that was passed in 2021, townhomes in the mixed-use zone district were exempted. And what's been happening is that in some of those zone districts, we've seen maybe a 7-unit building have 4 or 5 short-term rental licenses for the whole home. And that was really not ever the intent of that legislation. Townhomes are really one of the largest amount of new residential units we have, and they're also one of the more affordable housing stock compared to a standalone single-family home. And so the intent was to not, fill all of the new townhomes up with short-term rentals. We still want to make sure that a lot of that housing stock is available to people that will actually live there full-time, whether renting or owned. So that was the reason for all of this, but actually Finance took a look at how the enforcement and lodgers tax was going and recommended a few more items, and I'll briefly touch on those at the end, although that's not part of my presentation tonight. So it covered the whole home licensing in townhomes, and the proposed ordinance clarifies that townhomes are included in the cap regardless of zone district. So it essentially strikes the exemption, and townhomes are now included in the cap, just like any other type of dwelling unit, like a single family home or a duplex. That means that someone applying for a whole home short-term rental license in a townhome would be subject to the cap, just like their neighbors and single family homes are. One of the other minor changes to the code is the ordinance was originally approved November 1st, 2021, and that's when the cap started. And we're adjusting the reporting deadline of our licenses from November 1st to January 1st to align with other reporting deadlines within the city. We had already really wanted to do that, and we're just aligning our code with what we're doing in practice. And then lastly, as part of the changes to Chapter 26, we're revising the definition of short-term rental host to align with the existing and current definition in Chapter 11. We just realized that the 2 chapters did not have the same definition. And a short-term rental host is someone that's an owner, an occupant, a tenant, or a manager of a short-term rental property that manages the day-to-day operations. And so we had to expand that definition in Chapter 11. That was actually done last year to include these third-party services that often will clean and manage a short-term rental on behalf of an owner who may still live there, but they're not the ones doing the finances and all that stuff. It also clarifies the definition of what a townhome is. It's defined in our code, but we wanted to make sure that that definition was throughout the code, not just specific to certain types of properties. And then lastly is the updates to Chapter 11, which Planning Commission won't vote on, but those application requirements, advertisement requirements, and enforcement provisions are all being looked at by the Finance Division, and they're leading the effort to strengthen the city's abilities to enforce against bad actors and also marketplace facilitators like Airbnb and VRBO, and to update the city's fine schedule. So all those portions are being drafted separately, and will convene at City Council on August 26th to present both the zoning portion that I'm presenting tonight, as well as the other changes to the enforcement provisions that are in Chapter 11. And that's all I've got. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Seeing that we don't have anybody in the audience, has anybody showed up on Zoom to make a comment for the public hearing on this?
There is nobody at this time.
So I'll now entertain questions from commissioners, and we'll start with Mr. Kearns, Commissioner Kearns.
So just getting this straight, we're doing two things. We're defining owner, occupant, tenant, agent, and booking service manager is going to be part of that. And then we are defining rules around townhomes.
Yes, those are the two primary changes
Okay.
to Chapter 26.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Quinones,
I have no questions.
Commissioner Gravy,
No questions.
Commissioner Moore,
No questions.
Commissioner Quinn.
No questions at this time. Thanks for the presentation, Scott.
Commissioner Shelkey.
Just a couple questions. Do we have any kind of, do we have any kind of regulations about a person who's doing a long-term rental? If someone wants to rent their place out, not as a short-term, but as a long-term rental?
We don't have any specific registration or licensing associated with long-term rentals. Long-term rental is just defined as 30 days or more in the code.
So a person who is doing a long-term rental, it could turn into a short-term rental.
It could, but they would have to obtain a short-term rental license and go through that licensing process through the Finance Division.
Okay. So the definition is, it talks about, it's a person operation as a short-term rental, whether as an owner, co-owner, occupant, tenant, or agent of any of the same. What does that mean?
It really means that anyone who's involved in the managing of a short-term rental, whether that's posting it on the platform like Airbnb or VRBO, for example, someone that's taking the bookings, things like that. What we're finding, or what finance found, was that a lot of owners of property don't want to do all that transaction themselves, so they hire a third party to do it, and expanding the definition to these third parties will allow finance to enforce better on any bad actors or people that aren't current on their registration. Because the owners, you know, they might live there, but they're not actually dealing day to day with the booking or license fees or anything like that.
So could a person that has a long-term lease on a property decide they want to use it as a short-term rental?
That's actually prohibited by city code.
Okay. Because when I read this, it kind of sounds like you can't.
We're just trying to cover all our bases in case someone is still doing that technically illegally, but you know, we just want to make sure that the host is covered, whether it's above board or not.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I have a question. So if this change to the ordinance is voted on and townhomes are now part of that cap, I am going to assume that we'll be over the limit in all of the 4 districts. And if that's the case, what do you do if we have like 10 more units than we're supposed to because there was a townhome that got ushered in?
That is probably going to be the case, and that's okay, because no one's going to have to forfeit their license. If you have a license, you can keep it. We'll kind of know that we're over the cap, but then if they ever lose their license or forfeit their license, the number will keep going back down until we reach the cap, and any new applicant would be put on the wait list. So I think there's been some turnover on licenses, not actually a lot. A lot of people keep them for a while, but we want to make sure this doesn't happen to keeps happening to new developments where a larger proportion than is desirable become whole home short-term rentals.
Thank you. Any last questions from anyone?
Yeah, Scott, so how long is the license good for?
I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it's a year and it's renewed yearly through finance.
So they just have to renew, they don't have to reapply for it, for in that case that we have 10 extra ones?
Yeah, that would kind of, I think that would create an unfair system if we made people have to forfeit if they're otherwise following all the rules. It's just the new applicants, or if they ever gave up their license, they would have to go back on the wait list.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shelkey.
We have a number of ADUs that are kind of before this all came about. And I think a number of them aren't registered as anything. How does this apply to an ADU that has been around before this was all passed?
It depends. We do allow short-term rentals in ADUs as long as the person that owns the property lives on site in one of the units. And then they would still have to get what's called the partial home license, which is the other type of license that's not subject to the cap. And that basically says we live on site and we're renting out a second unit on our property. So they would still have to get licensed through the city.
So they're still supposed to get a license.
Yeah, it's a different type of license, but it's essentially the same. The city still receives tax revenue and from that type of license as well.
I think there are a number of them, though, that are just doing it on the side. They have a existing ADU from back in the day, and they rent it out as they see fit.
I don't have a report on the exact compliance rate, but we're in the high 80% compliance rate is my understanding. So most of those probably actually do have a license, because the platform that finance uses they basically can determine whether someone has a license or not, or is they're posting it online or not. So unless it was completely off book, which almost none are, we have a very high compliance rate, which is good.
Okay.
Commissioner Quinones.
You mentioned that there's no caps for the licensing for ADUs. Is there a reason for that?
It's not specific to ADUs, but it's what's called the partial home license, where the owner lives on the site full time. They might rent out a bedroom on their property. They might rent out a unit above their garage or something like that. And the intent behind this was that because someone is there full time, it would never be like the entire property being rented out. So it's less impactful. It's generally limited to a single bedroom or something like that on the property where the owner's there.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
One
I'll-
other.
Mr. Miller.
Scott, just wanted to ask, definition of short-term rental, you had mentioned the rental rate versus days. Can I just clarify that with you? It is,
I believe it's less than 30. I don't remember if it's 29 or 30, but it's a month or less.
at how many turnovers inside that time period?
The only requirement that the city has is that there's a minimum 2-night stay. So a person couldn't rent out to a new person every night. So it's 2 nights, and then, yeah, whatever they can book, they're allowed to have, as long as they're following all the other rules.
I guess, I heard you mention it. Let me just rephrase. I just want to get some clarity. So, 4 stays within 30-day time frame is the qualification for that, for somebody to apply for it?
No. So a short-term rental is just any rental term less than 29 days or 30 days. There's no restriction within that month period, I guess, of how many bookings there are. The only requirement with the city is that any person has to stay on the property at least 2 days, so there's less turnover.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, I'll close the public hearing, and I'll now entertain a motion. Commissioner Kearns.
Madam Chair, I move to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending Chapter 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws regarding requirements for short-term rentals.
I have a second.
Second.
Commissioners, please vote.
Motion approved, 7-0.
All right. We are now going to discuss case number, it's here somewhere, Z0A-2406. Commissioner Gravy.
An ordinance amending section 26-646F of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws regarding approval of nonconforming accessory dwelling units.
May I please have the staff report?
You can. So this ordinance extends, and I'll get into it in a little bit to define what the grace period is, but it extends the grace period to legalize existing dwelling units that may qualify as an accessory dwelling unit or ADU from August 15th, 2024 to August 15th, 2026. But before I get into the details of this ordinance, which is actually really short, it's just crossing out 2024 and writing 2026, I wanted to give the Planning Commission an update because I don't think we've been back to Planning Commission since the original ADU ordinance was approved in the summer of 2022. So just want to let everyone know how things are going and then go from there. So one of the specific goals of the original ordinance, which was now passed about almost exactly 2 years ago, was to create a process for legalizing existing dwellings which might fall within the definition of an ADU. And so the ordinance established a grace period where property owners could submit evidence of prior existence of that dwelling unit on their property without fear of penalty. And then units legalized under that grace period have some more flexibility, really limited to life safety concerns and an inspection of that. We knew when we passed that ordinance a couple of years ago that there are dozens of existing ADUs throughout the city, some dating back to the 1800s, that have always been kind of in existence on people's properties, and we wanted to make sure that those could get legitimized as real dwelling units for people to occupy safely. So that grace period was meant to be 2 years. The ordinance took effect in August of 2022, and the grace period now expires August 15th of 2024. And then after the grace period would end, any unapproved or unpermitted ADU shall be subject to enforcement as provided by law. That's what the code says. Which would include potentially code enforcement citations, requirements for building permits. Anyone that has an existing ADU on their property would have to potentially go through extremely expensive upgrades to meet current building code requirements, even though potentially the ADUs date back to the 1800s. So the end of the grace period really just means that someone would have to apply for a new ADU permit, make upgrades, and they also might not be able to meet a lot of our current zoning code requirements. So the grace period was really meant to relax a lot of those requirements and allow people to come forward and legitimize what's already on their property. We have been really successful in getting people to come forward and legalize existing ADUs on their property, and we continue to receive applications. So this staff report was written in early June. We had 23 applications in for existing ADUs. I think we're up to 25 or 26 now, and a couple of those have been legalized as well. So I'll just go off what the report says. 13 have been legalized, which is great. Of those not officially legalized yet, 3 were still under review at the time. awaiting inspection or awaiting some formality with the deed restrictions. And then 7 people elected not to move forward after receiving an inspection or initial review. I think a lot of that was the need for more substantial building permits. We don't require someone to meet all building codes, but for example, someone applied, there was no running water in the unit. So obviously we can't legalize that as a legitimate housing unit. They had to go get a water tap. So there's some that were just more challenging to move forward to approval, but still 13 of the 23, I think now like 15 or 16 of the 25 or so have been legalized, which is great. We believe that there are still additional ADUs out there, and kind of, hearsay know about some, but we know that the owner haven't applied yet. And so allowing the owners to come forward on their own time and not taking a punitive approach has been really successful in getting people to legalize dwelling units on their property. Without a grace period, owners are definitely less likely to come forward. And so in practice, it would be like pre-2022 where ADUs were prohibited in the city. And these would only apply to people that had ADUs on their property prior to 2022. So it's not people that did something without permits in the last couple of years. It would be something that was already in existence before the original ordinance was even passed. We didn't want to open that can of worms. Council did give unanimous support to extend the grace period until 2026. But one of the things we talked about at that study session was developing more of an outreach plan to reach out to people and be more proactive about having people come forward. I think there are some opportunities there to update our website, maybe send out something in Mayor's Matters, and some more social media blasts, because the program so far has been really successful, which is why we are recommending the extension for another couple of years. That's all I've got. Happy to answer any questions.
I'll now open the hearing for public comment, seeing there's no one in chambers. Is there anyone online?
Nobody online.
I will now entertain questions from commissioners. We'll start to my left, Commissioner Shelkey.
Thank you. That's kind of what I was talking about a little bit. Especially maybe in the older parts of town, there are quite a few ADUs that were handyman kind of jobs where the guy went into his garage and developed what he thought was a pretty good apartment. And I know some of these people, and I know they have no intention of coming forward and getting licensed. They're not going to do it. So do you have a process to reach out to those people?
We do, and just to clarify, there's not a license associated with it. It's just getting a legal dwelling unit, and essentially it's called a certificate of ADU approval, where the city recognizes it.
Right.
There's been absolutely no downside with people coming forward. There's not a fear of reprisal or fees or anything like that, because we're not doing anything. We're basically saying, this is what we found. It's already legal, great. That's one bucket of people. There's some that might say, oh, you need to add a smoke detector and then this is legal, great. And then there's some where it might be, you need running water. And then they know that they need running water in order to make it a legal dwelling unit. But what we're not doing is going in and saying, oh, you don't meet building code and you failed all this, and we're not taking that punitive approach. So there's been absolutely no downside with people coming forward. They just come out of it either more informed or with an extra legal dwelling unit on their property, which is really good.
No, I think the way you're doing it is really good. I mean, I'm not critical of that at all. I'm just saying that there are people out there that have ADU units that have no intention of letting you know about them.
Yeah, that's fair. We won't get to everyone, but there's no downside to
Okay.
registering. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Quinn?
Pardon me. Thanks for the presentation, Scott. Is there a definition of ADU? Listening to what Commissioner Shalke had said, I'm just wondering, what defines an ADU?
There is. It's in our code. I could pull it up if you want, but it's basically a dwelling unit. So it's a dwelling unit, which means kitchen, sleeping quarters, bathroom. That's smaller in size and scale to the primary dwelling unit, which is on the property. So it could be attached, could be in the basement, but it's separate, so it's not integrated at all into the main house. Or if it's in a different building, it's smaller in scale, height, and size.
Perfect, thank you.
Commissioner Moore,
No questions at this time.
Commissioner Gravy.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, has there been a significant amount of new ADU construction since they've been allowed? Or have folks found it too cost prohibitive to go all in and build one of these?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. I want to say we've had 15 new ADUs permitted. I think because of construction lag permitting, I think only a handful have been completed, but we continue to see interest. I do think there is some cost to invest, particularly when you have to add utilities. Water is the expensive one in Colorado. So we have seen some, but not a ton.
Thank you.
Commissioner Quinones.
Out of curiosity, what is the benefit for those that already have an existing ADU to come forward and get it permitted by the city?
There are a few benefits. So one is you can get a second address, which means that if you have a tenant, they can get mail to their own address. You can get a separate electrical meter to have a tenant get their own electrical bill. I think some of it is actually adding resale value to your property. So you can say, this is a legal ADU. It's kind of a incentive if someone ever wanted to sell their property that it's a value add. I think some of it is just people wanting to feel like they have something and not, in 2 years have the city come after them. Because that was the case before 2022. If someone was like, oh, I have this random apartment on my property, the default was, oh, well, it's unpermitted and you have to decommission it. And now it's having something that's actually legally able to be rented out to someone has provided a big value add to a lot of people.
And would that affect whether property taxes? Would it increase them with it being permitted? Because if we're looking at an additional dwelling and doing an enhancement to the property per se, are residents looking at that?
That's a good question. We don't handle taxation. That's all through the county. So I don't know the answer. I don't know how adding an ADU would increase or decrease value or tax rate or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Kearns.
One quick one. You mentioned that the ADUs need water. Does the water have to be connected to the main property, or can they be on a water tank?
I think they have to be on municipal
Oh, on
utilities.
municipal.
With existing ADUs, we've seen, some of them are off, like an offshoot of the line to the house. With new ADUs, we've seen the water district actually, in some cases, require a separate tap, which is the killer on the cost.
That's expensive.
It depends on the number of fixtures or kitchen or things like that. But yeah, it kind of depends on whether it's existing or new.
Okay. Thank you.
Any additional questions? All right. I will now close the public hearing and will entertain a motion. Commissioner Gravy?
I move to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending section 26-646F of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws regarding approval of non-conforming accessory dwelling units.
Can I get a second?
Second?
Any discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, I will ask for a vote. Commissioners vote.
Motion approved, 7-0.
All right. Next item on our agenda is old business. Do we have any old business to discuss?
There is no old business, Madam Chair.
Any new business?
Yes, we have a couple of items under new business, and the first is going to start with a city plan update. So with me, I've got Ella Stevie, the project manager, and the consultant team is, a couple of the folks from the consultant team are also joining us via Zoom. And they have a presentation, and then there will be some discussion. And with that, I'm going to let Ella introduce herself and give a brief update of where we're at on the city plan.
Great, thank you. I'm Ella Stevie. I am a senior neighborhood planner. I'm the project manager for the city plan. So thanks for having me here tonight. And we are here to talk about the city plan, which is the update to our comprehensive plan. So many of you attended our June 6th open house. Thank you so much for coming. It's great to have more people there, and it's also really meaningful for community members to get to see, commission members like yourself at these events and see you taking in their input. So I think that's really, really important, and I appreciate your extra time at that. So as the project team has been kind of going through all the input that we got at that meeting and from our online survey, we wanted to come back to convene this group to get to dive into some of that content in more detail. So our consultant, CZB, is joining us on Zoom tonight. And they're going to just do an overview of the project and where we are, touch briefly on what we heard last month, and have a discussion with you all about some of that content that you saw. So we're going to talk about core values. We're going to talk about planning principles and priorities and next steps. So I will hand it over to our colleagues on the screen.
Great, thank you, Ella. I think I'm the only one from the team here tonight. We've had some snafus regarding people getting caught up in travel at airports. So my name is Matt Ingalls. I'm with CZB. I'm here to give you an update on where we are with the city plan and get your thoughts on some of the content that we shared at the meetings in June. So thank you for those that were able to attend the open house. We had a good turnout, got really good feedback, and I think it really has begun to confirm the direction on some of the content for the city plan. Some of the, let's see. Jan, I can't share my screen.
Matt, can you try and share now?
Yep, there we go. That worked. Okay. Everybody see that?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So some of this, I apologize, it might be a little bit redundant. You've probably seen it before, but I think it certainly doesn't hurt to revisit what we're trying to do here in terms of project basics. The city plan will be updated, updating the existing comprehensive plan. And there's a few things that we want to make sure it articulates. Certainly the community's vision and establish shared community-based values. It's also set the general direction for priorities moving forward over the course of the next decade or so. One of the things that we find is important in modern comprehensive plan is to provide some sort of decision-making framework to help guide decisions years to come that we just have no way of knowing what those decisions that need to be made are today. and then also guide the actions of property owners, residents, elected officials, appointed officials, staff, and others. So we're really looking to create a plan that is for everyone. It's not just for use within City Hall, but hopefully you'll have residents and realtors and developers and business owners and everybody that can that share in that vision, that can find it useful. Over the years, we found that a great comprehensive plan includes three fundamental components. First and foremost, it gets the big things right. And when we talk about the big things, we mean the things that are so important that they require special resources and time and effort to make sure that we get them right and that they're important to the community over the next 10 years. A great comprehensive plan plans for what is known. There are certain trends and activities and conditions that we know are happening within the community, so we want to make sure that we plan for those. And then also, as I mentioned, creates a decision-making framework for what is unknown. Because we don't have a crystal ball here in July of 2024. We don't know what's going to happen in 8 months from now or a year from now, let alone 5 years from now. So developing some sort of framework to help guide those decisions. And that's a big part of what we want to share with you tonight, based on that decision-making framework is comprised of core values that have been developed by the community, as well as some basic planning principles. So the city plan is a community-driven process. There are 4 phases of engagement, and we have actually finished 2 rounds of that engagement. And the Wheat Ridge City Plan process is informed and guided by the Wheat Ridge community through several different methods. There's certainly the multiple public engagement options that we'll talk about here in a minute. We're also working with the steering committee, and then certainly City Council and the Planning Commission weighing in as well throughout the process. So it's a combination of things all working together that's driving the process and ultimately the formation of the city plan document. So we have multiple options for engagement throughout the process. We've had online surveys. Usually, actually, the first 2 rounds of engagement, we've had in-person events and the open house format where people can drop in anytime between a time slot. And then we usually have also launching right before the public event an online survey with the same content so that people that might not be able to attend the in-person event can actually weigh in online. We have the project website, and then also the staff has started with targeted intercepts in different community events and things like that to also get people's input in the process. We're using What's Up Wheat Ridge. That's been available. That's where the online surveys have been launched. In this last phase, which is the second phase, community engagement, we had the survey up from June 6th through Friday, June 28th. We had nearly 400 participants in that online survey, which is actually very, very good. So we were happy with that. Got a lot of really good input, a lot of good comments on the draft materials. We've had 3 meetings now with the steering committee. We have an 18-member steering committee, local stakeholders. Hopefully they're finding the process rewarding and engaging, hopefully fun as well. We try to keep them busy, and really they're the folks that are helping to steer the project as we move through, and then really is our sounding board for all the content that we generate based on everything that we've heard. So in terms of timeline, we're about halfway through the project here. We kicked it off in January, and then we're going to be really in the middle of phase 2, almost in the middle of phase 2, in basically a 3-phase process. Phase 0 is just really the preparation for everything. Phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 is where the work is really generated, and we're in the envision phase, and we'll be finishing that up in the beginning of the fall with the 3rd round of engagement in September. I think we're slated for the week of September 16th. So we'll have another round of engagement with the public, but we'll also have a check-in with you folks, as well as the city council, and then also a steering committee meeting. And we're looking to have a draft plan, hopefully before the holidays, but certainly by the end of the year. So we wanted to share a little bit of what we heard in June for those of you that could not make it. So we did several activities during this round of engagement. We had 2-by-2 meetings with city council members for a couple of days there, where we basically were able to sit down and roll up our sleeves and talk about the content that you're actually going to see tonight. We had an open house event at the Recreation Center. We had about 130 attendees at that. We had the project steering committee, and then, as I mentioned previously, we had the online survey that closed on June 28th, and we had nearly 400 participants in that survey. So, as Ella mentioned, what we heard is basically a general support and consensus around some of the core values, the planning principles, and also the planning priorities, which when we started this process, we were referring to those as the big things. And now that's evolved into the planning priorities. So this was a combination of really the output from everything that we've heard up to this point. We're going to start with the core values. So when we think about core values, these are the deeply held and widely shared beliefs of the community. These are the things that people are willing to fight for, that are also really begin to make Wheat Ridge. They tend to be durable and have lasting value. That's one of the reasons why we like to include core values in the decision-making framework, because they are durable. They do tend to withstand the test of time. And then once identified, they really become part of the decision-making framework along with the planning principles. So we have 3 core values. The first one is being an inclusive community. This is our being welcome to everyone. We know that Wheat Ridge has become more diverse over the last decade. And we've also heard from a lot of people that it is becoming more inclusive, that people are more accepting of people that maybe don't make as much money as they do or don't look necessarily the same way. So we want to make sure that we continue to be an inclusive community. We are committed to being an independent mining community. One of the things I think we've learned early on, that Wheat Ridge is willing to go its own way and is proud to do that. It doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't pay attention to what other communities are doing or best practices. It certainly does, but it really wants to do what's best for Wheat Ridge and aspire to be the best version of itself. And then the third core value is forward-looking, being responsible from an environment standpoint, from a fiscal decision standpoint, to really create lasting value in the community for future generations. So those are our core values. And then there's also a set of planning principles that are part of that decision-making framework. And these help guide the decisions and help translate those values into action. So there are 4 basic principles. First and foremost is really getting at that inclusive value, serving a mix of incomes. And then this one, the second one, preserve our patchwork quilt. This is something we also heard early on, that people are proud of the fact that Wheat Ridge is a place of places. It has these pockets that have its own character. Some are considered neighborhoods, and people want to make sure that we preserve that, and that as you continue to grow and move forward, that that place of places, or that patchwork quilt, stays intact as much as certainly possible. And focus on sustainability, making sure that we reduce as much as possible greenhouse gas emissions, that we accommodate pedestrian and cyclists, and we're a multimodal community, and that we also begin to take steps to protect air and water and those types of environmental features that are so important to our communities. And then also strengthen the city's fiscal position, being fiscal responsible, making sure that we make decisions that invest in our future, and that we create long-term assets that add value over time. So these are our 4 planning principles. So between the 3 core values and the planning principles, they set the stage for that decision-making framework that could be outlined in the city plan. The last component of content that we shared at the June meeting were the planning priorities. These are the things that are really, really important to the future of the community. They play a role that's so important that it could determine whether the city is a better place in 10 years from now. And as I mentioned previously, they're the big things that may require special attention and resources to make sure that we get them right. But each priority area is broad in scope. It can touch on a lot of different types of things. And it really plays, each one of them plays a central role in the quality of life for Wheat Ridge residents. So these are the 4 priority areas, and we're going to touch briefly on each one of these in terms of what does this actually mean. So the first one we heard over and over is improving the retail and business environment, and that people felt like Wheat Ridge has historically missed out on certain types of retail and restaurant offerings. But over the last number of years, Wheat Ridge is starting to see success in places like Gold's Marketplace and some other locally owned business and establishments. One of my colleagues has said that lives actually in the area north of Denver has said that it wasn't that long ago that you couldn't buy a really good cup of coffee or a good place for lunch in Wheat Ridge, and that has certainly changed, which is a good thing. So how do we begin to make sure that we keep that momentum going and build on those successes? So we've been also coordinating with your consultant on the economic development and the retail piece of it, Puma, so we make sure that we're aligned with some of their findings as well. The second priority area is 38th Avenue from Lutheran Legacy Campus to Harlan. I think everybody would recognize that 38th is really the heart of, or certainly a big part of Wheat Ridge. It's one of your main corridors. Many people consider it the main street. And there's been a lot of planning effort, a lot of investment in the 38th Avenue corridor, especially with the 38th Avenue corridor plan. But some of those outcomes have not yet been realized or achieved. And so we want to make sure that with everything that's going on with the Lutheran Legacy Campus, that we begin to make sure that we think about the context of the Lutheran Legacy Campus and all the improvements that have been made on 38, and how do we begin to strengthen those two things and make sure that they work together. But certainly Lutheran could be an anchor on that western end of that core corridor. The third priority area is the network of pedestrian and bicycle facilities across the city. This is one thing we also heard early on and over, that people find it difficult to get around in Wheat Ridge without a car, so walking and biking, and they would like to be able to access key assets such as Clear Creek and city parks without having to get in their car. So neighborhood connections, connections from neighborhoods to core commercial areas and things like that. So that network of pedestrian and bicycle facilities across the city, or that non-motorized travel, is something that is important to people. And then the last one is the proactive infrastructure management. I think this was one of the really big ones out of the last survey, that people over and over ranked this one really high, and basically saying, listen, we need to make sure we get the basic infrastructure right. Nobody really pays much attention to, streets and sewer pipes and all those types of things, stormwater, until it's not working. And then it becomes a real big issue. So it really can impact people's quality of life. So we want to make sure that we invest in and proactively manage the infrastructure. So before we open it up, I'll just let you know what our next steps are. We've got into phase 2, the envision phase. We started work on the future land use and place types framework. We're also doing work on this mobility framework that is really kind of focused not only on non-motorized, but also motorized. So really kind of finding balance between motorized and non-motorized travel. We're also looking at prototype focus areas, where these areas we could begin to apply the core values and the planning principles to certain areas that can also be prototypes for other areas and challenges that the city might have. So we want to make sure that they're really useful tools as well. So then, as I mentioned previously, our next round of meetings, the week of September 16th, and we'll be back in town for another series of meetings and really get people's feedback on this content that you see on the screen here, the future land use place types, mobility framework, and some of this prototypical work that we're doing in certain areas. So with that, I'd like to open it up to your thoughts. Do these things resonate with you? What any comments or questions regarding this content? And yeah, let me know if you have any questions.
Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions of Matt? We're a quiet bunch tonight. We don't have any questions. Very
Well, my
thorough
guess is
presentation. Thank you.
Absolutely. My guess is some of this stuff, if you attend the open house, you probably got a pretty good handle on it.
I have one comment.
Commissioner Gravy?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Matt, for the presentation, for all your
Absolutely.
work. I appreciate it. Pardon me. I just wanted to make a plug for, and I know that the preview, the slide of concepts in action kind of gives a nod to some of the other commercial corridors. I understand with the, with the upcoming Lutheran development, that 38th Avenue is certainly deserves a primary focus area with the city. But I do think that, when I think of Wheat Ridge, I also think, frankly, that 44th is an extremely important stretch for the future. I mean, I envision like Anderson Park as kind of the city park. There's just a lot of investment that's happening and has happened there. I think there's a lot of commercial potential between Wadsworth and Kipling and elsewhere. And I also, I'm sensitive to the fact that it's an entry point to Wheat Ridge from a part of, from other communities that aren't necessarily as aesthetically pleasing. And so I just always take this opportunity to encourage the city to focus on 44th in a thoughtful way. And, while we think of a long-term plan, that I think it's a very important corridor, particularly because it has a closer proximity to the Clear Creek. And, I think that kind of the parks and open space, and in particular Clear Creek Trail, is really, in my mind, kind of has the highest value in the city. And so, that's something that's a big priority for me and someone with young kids. And so I just, want to make sure that we're given that due consideration.
And while we're putting in plugs, I want to put in my plug for consideration of both a Trails Master Plan for the Lutheran Legacy Campus that somewhat complements and mirrors the Crown Hill Park trails. I think with the Lutheran Legacy Campus, we have an opportunity to actually build that campus around a trails network, like plan the trails network first, build the development around the trails. My other plug is to consider the Rocky Mountain Ditch for a trail. And I know that's not going to be easy. Ditch companies are typically resistant to that kind of stuff, but it's one of my long-term goals as District 3 to open up the Rocky Mountain Ditch to some sort of a bicycle and pedestrian easement, similar to the Highline Canal Trail that runs through the city. So, thank you. That's all.
Matt, I have a question. How's our community engagement with this? Are you happy with the numbers of people who have been participating in this process?
Yeah, we are. I think it actually has surprised us a little bit because, especially for the in-person meetings, since COVID, our numbers have gone up considerably online, the online engagement. And which is not that surprising. So the numbers that we're getting online, that pushing 400 participants, I think that's quite common. But to get 100, pushing 150 people showing up at an open house in person, I think that's a little bit unique now, and I think we've been very, very pleased with that. And kudos to staff and communications in the city for your communication system, your transparency, and your involvement, really getting the word out to folks. And I think that it's truly making a difference. So yeah, I think we've been very pleased with the engagement.
My second question has to do with, at the second open house, I was reading some of the comments that people had posted on the boards along the process. There were a lot of, I guess they could be characterized as negative comments, people kind of complaining and saying that Wheat Ridge isn't the place that it's used to be, and it's too woke. And it seemed like there was a lot of pushback. What do you do with that feedback? Does that get relayed to city staff, or how is that kind of taken into consideration when you're forming this plan?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Unfortunately, it's not unusual to get comments like that for some reason, especially now. It just seems like people, there's so many things going on that nostalgic feeling that people don't want things to change. They would like things to kind of stay the way they are, but the reality of it is our communities are constantly changing. They're evolving demographically, but it's slow and it's incrementally. And so people don't notice it quite as much. And so when we have planning processes like this, that we're actually actively talking about what could change and what could stay the same, it's tough for some people. But I also think the reality of it is that although there were those negative comments, we literally have, thousands of really positive comments as well between the online and the in-person comments. So, you kind of have to weigh those out. And if you get a few bad comments at a community, we certainly take those into account. And, if we hear them over and over and over, it begins to tell us certain things, and we need to take a closer look at things. Yeah, that's all factored in. And, I think it's okay that we have, positive comments and negative comments. It means that people are paying attention, they're thinking about it, and we don't necessarily all agree all the time.
Thank you.
I have one more quick one, if that's all right. Just in terms of the process, I appreciate how much of a public process it's been, how much work has been put into getting as much input as possible. What does it look like for when the draft plan is released? Is there an opportunity for the public to kind of suggest edits, so to speak, or to comment on the draft plan itself? And then, typically, like, how much does a plan like this change once the draft is released before it's finalized?
Yeah, great question. So how it typically works is we're going to have another round of engagement in September, and then a lot of the content, the big things in the plan, we'll have a pretty good handle on, and then we will go into actually developing the plan document in the third phase, and then we'll bring it back for a fourth round of engagement as a draft, and we'll have another round of meetings. Sometimes that document is put out online for a certain period of time for folks to download it and read it and send in comments and things like that. There's certainly, in the past where we've had, tweaks to the plan and things like that, those are things that we expect. But hopefully when we get to that point, when folks pull it down and look at it, they won't see any surprises. They might quibble over, the wording of this or the wording of that, or the time frame of this or the time frame of that. But all the concepts and really the core content will have been presented to them prior to the draft plan. And also, our goal is for folks to look at it and say, geez, I see some of my ideas in there. I remember when we talked about this. I remember when I voted on this, or I sent a comment in, whether it be on the online survey, in one of the phases, or if it was at a community open house. So that's the goal, no surprises. Hopefully when we get there, people will look at it and say, geez, this is representative of the process. And even if they don't necessarily agree with everything that's in there, there shouldn't be any surprises on any of it. That's the goal.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Really appreciate you coming to the meeting and giving us this update. It's good to know what's going on, and you guys always do such a great job, so thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. And we'll be back in a few months to check in with you again.
All right, thanks. Any other new
Take care, everyone.
business?
Okay, so with that wrapped up, let's move on to upcoming dates. So our next dates are in August 1st and August 15th, and we do have items scheduled for both. August 1st, you will learn a little bit more about our new WaterWise ordinance. So drought tolerant landscaping and some of the changes that we're proposing for that. And then on the 15th, what we'd like to do is have a sort of a study session with you all around the Lutheran Legacy Campus and give you kind of a progress report and where we're at and get some feedback from you all. And so that is tentatively scheduled for the 15th, and I think we can make that happen. And then just so that you know, I sent out an email earlier to y'all with just a couple links to the city council study session memo and the video. And so hopefully if you have time, give that a watch. I think it was pretty interesting. I wasn't there, but I did watch it afterwards. And so that can probably help you in some of the discussion topics that we'll be covering on the 15th.
Jana, I have a question. As far as the survey that they are doing right now, do we know when they're going to decide whether to bring it to a vote in November? It is going to come to a vote, right, about amending the charter?
I anticipate that it will. We're still having discussions with city council. We're taking back we're probably going to be talking more about height on August 5th with them, because that was something that it really needed a bit more thought, and also the survey will be back, and it just needed a little bit more time. So we're going to be having that discussion with them on the 5th, and we'll be able to update you on how that went.
Who did the wording for that survey? Do you know who?
The survey it's being done by Magellan. I don't know the ins and outs of who else reviewed it.
Because I had a long, tried to keep it from being heated conversation with a neighbor last night who felt like the city was being, in the language where it said, if you don't vote for the height, you might not get the amenities you want. And he felt like that wording was coercive. And I tried to explain that this whole process has not been that way, that the city has really tried to engage the citizens. It was a year-long process to come up with the master plan. Everything, input was taken, and that it just cost a lot of money if you're going to do something higher than 5 stories. So I just wanted to point that out, that with the current atmosphere, I guess, in the world right now, with people not trusting the government, he was just adamant that this was backhanded, and I was trying to ease his concerns on that.
Yeah, and it sounds like you did a good job and gave the information that you had. I would say that it was in no way meant to be coercive, but it is a fact. Because if the center of the campus can't get a little bit more dense, and that means taller as well, it will mean that the zoning would probably revert to the 35 feet for residential, 50 for non-residential, and it would be spread across the entire campus. And so there are some trade-offs, and that's what we're trying to help people understand, is the trade-offs. There are benefits to being able to provide higher density in the center, greater chances for public open space, and lower heights around the perimeter next to the adjacent homes. So there are trade-offs, and I think that folks do need to understand that the trade-offs are really, really important. And that's why the height and density are in our charter, and that's why it has to go back to a vote of the people. But it is an extremely important site. To your point, there was the year-long master plan process for the Legacy campus, and the zoning, the proposed mixed-use zoning that we're currently in the works of developing a framework for is precisely to target those trade-offs. For example, in the charter language, if there's a question on the ballot that relates to removing the height restriction to a certain portion of the campus, that's basically what the charter question will ask. But then when you get into the zoning, we can be more prescriptive and start talking about the concept plan when the developer gets on board and things like that, and what we are going to be asking to be required, like trying to preserve some of the assets, like the Blue House, like the trail along the Rocky Mountain Ditch. Of course, we do need, the ditch company on board with that, but even if we have to do an easement outside of that, those are conversations that we have to have later on. But the zoning can really start to inform some of that and put some parameters around. By giving you this, we are asking for something in return. Because right now, if it was just zoned to one of our mixed-use categories, we wouldn't have that leverage. So it sounds like you did a great job with the person, and I'm sorry that you had to have that conversation. I hope I think that our hope is through education, we can help folks to understand that zoning isn't easy. These decisions are not easy, but to get some of the trade-offs that we're hoping for, like greater amounts of open space and lower density around the perimeter, and we're talking lower heights around the perimeter than our code currently would allow. Those discussions are maybe difficult discussions, but they need to be had. And so whatever we can do to help educate you all, if you're having those discussions with the residents, you can also send them to the whatsupwheatridge.com/Lutheran. Did I get that right? I think I got that right. Page, and it has a lot of information that we keep updated. And so, if you don't feel comfortable having that discussion, you can send them there. You can also send them to our zoning hotline, frankly. And we can continue that conversation. There's going to be plenty of opportunities, especially through the zoning process, for the public's input and discussion. And so hopefully that helps. But I do appreciate your feedback. And by the way, we have provided some input. I think we had another email come in, and we've been providing that input directly back to Magellan. Someone was concerned about clicking the link in a text. And in this day and age, you tend to maybe delete or click a link, or not want to click a link. And so anyway, we've been providing this feedback regarding the survey back to Magellan directly. So
Thank you.
you're very welcome.
Do we have any commissioner updates? All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Madam Chair.
May I have a second?
Second.
Commissioners vote. We are adjourned.
Motion approved, 7-0.
Sorry.